Hi there. Let's talk about post-colonial African art, so modern African art after World War II, when the many nations of African art who struggled to liberate themselves from their colonial past and try and discover a new voice and a new direction in art. One of the primary concerns and questions that was about African art and artists who in Africa was, what does it mean to be an African artist and to be a modern African artist at that? One can say that an African artist are not so much fighting for the freedom to be African, whatever that may be, but to be fully accepted as artists, that this can only be articulated through their Africanness, since that is the site of their categorical exclusion from the global art discourse in the first place, says Sydney Littlefield-Cassvere, a contemporary African artist. And in this way, he's articulating this idea that you have to be African, that you are always presented within the context of being an African artist, and an artist as a person who is sort of in dialogue with Africa, and something that we elsewhere may take for granted, that we are American artists or European artists even, but something that is materially and functionally a part of the definition of what it means to be an artist from Africa. To begin with, I want to talk about two early directions in contemporary African art. One is a pop fusion, where there is a sort of commentary on traditions of the past and the colonial rule. And this is done with a kind of humor and biting satire as a way of looking at the contemporary situation as being a juxtaposition of a dead and forgotten past with a very painful recent past. Another area we're going to be looking into is new traditions. As African nations grew in wealth and prosperity, they had new materials and new ideas about what was possible. And these new traditions sort of pop up in this opening up of traditional African society. One of the first artists I want to talk about is Trigo Piula, who is one of these pop fusion artists. And in his work, you see this critical take of what it means to be a modern African artist. His work is surreal in its juxtaposition of elements, but it also has an unmistakable humor and sarcasm. Take, for example, his Materna from 1984. We're looking at what looks like an idol, or in the figure of a kind of wooden figure. The body is wooden, African traditional maternity figure. But the head is clearly white woman. There's a colonial antique collar, and she looks bored and indifferent to the child which is in our lap, which is dead. And there is scattered about candles that have burned down or even extinguished, and then a series of condensed canned milks with strange creatures sort of lurking in and out of them. What is going on? One of the clues is actually in the background, this fabric that seems to hang on the wall directly behind them. And if you remember, this is the Ankara fabric, the fabric that was sold to Africans at this steeply discounted price, material goods that were dumped in Africa, that become a part of the, quote, fabric of everyday life in Africa, the way in which the material world. And so part of this painting's culture is this idea that it is a commentary on the way condensed milk, passes for mother's milk. And this icon of African maternity has been taken over by a rather indifferent European woman. We also see this painting on the right is a self-portrait of Trigo Piula, with his Hawaiian shirt on and his own hand painting himself. And he seems to be reacting to his own brush painting himself in the picture. And there's also a very humorous, the backside of a dog sort of in the painting behind him. We can see also Trigo Piula's humor in Tatele, the television, where he shows us now another, which should be familiar icon to you. This is the Inkisi, where there's the mirrored belly, which is full of medicines. And here it is a television wired to the back. And behind it, all kinds of images of television screens coming forward and inundating and filling the minds of the people who are sitting there watching it. So partly this new fetishism of the past has been converted into this new modern medium of television. Another interesting development in this idea of the new traditions is the way in which recycling, which had always been a part of African art, but now it becomes a major part of what tourists buy and where the art is being made from. One of the early examples of a kind of recycled art is toys that children made for themselves based on automobiles. And some of these are quite complex vehicles made of a variety of scrap materials that they would collect and bend and weave together to create these automobiles. And then they would have parades with their galimotos. Galimoto is a great way of kind of seeing once the poverty and the ingenious ways in which these poor children are trying to have, this sense of pride in what they make and they have steering wheels that operate the front wheels so they can walk their car in front of them and they can turn corners as they go. This idea of the recycled art comes into a lot of contemporary artists as well. Abu Bakr Mansouri has done a number of Galimoto-esque wire sculptures of fantastic visionary machines. This one here is what's called Hell Extinguisher, which has in it all kinds of odd contraptions and internal ideas that are supposed to somehow cure all traditional ills through modern technology. The whimsical, fantastic, and absurd nature of these vehicles is part and parcel of the Galimoto, which also has overweening aspirations of the young children as they make their vehicles. So too, Abu Bakr Mansouri has created his vehicles with this sense of whimsical and satirical ideas about the future and what the future holds and what promises it has. Another very interesting artist who uses recycled materials is Bodizi Sek Ingles from Zaire. He is an artist who has used office supplies to create these kind of fantastic future worlds, malls and shopping centers and corporate office buildings made out of the materials and the paper stuffs that they produce for themselves. And in these little landscapes, these fictional landscapes, he presents us with a fascinating depiction of a world which is really everywhere and nowhere, that you can walk through modern cities and imagine yourselves in Zaire, in Disneyland, in Miami, in Hiroshima. They transport us to a more perfect virtual world of pure desire outside of time and place. Here you can see, looking down, fun and imaginative wonder that he puts into his paper landscapes. Another kind of very powerful recycling that has been happening in contemporary African art is the way in which weapons that had been confiscated from civil wars in Africa have been chopped up and made into new works. Very powerfully is Kester Maputo from Mozambique. He's made a throne, a Western-style throne from the very weapons that were used from European, Russian, and American weapons that were confiscated during the amnesty of the Civil War in Mozambique in 1992. And these he has learned how to weld and fashion them. He was a victim of this war, and in part and parcel of his own healing from that terrible civil war is his opportunity to place and use these and refashion them, these weapons, into something new. It's a testament to the violence of the past. This throne was made a part of the TAE project, and this is transforming arms into Plowshores. And there have been a number of these kinds of projects where they have brought people in to leave their weapons, get them out of the hands of the people, and in turn give them some productive farming tools so they do not resort to violence and they can really start to build more productive lives for their communities. Another very interesting new tradition that has emerged in Africa is one that came about almost by happenstance. Cain was a sculptor who made large wooden statues for people's businesses. And one day he had a man come who owned a shoe store and he wanted a giant shoe made. As the story goes, the man died before the shoe was finished. And when he asked them, what do you want to do with this shoe that he ordered, this giant wooden shoe? They decided that they would bury him in it. And because he loved his shoe store, and his shoe was a great symbol of what he lived for and his great success in life. And so they made the very first fantasy coffin in Ghana. This hen-shaped coffin is now part and parcel of the wide variety of different kinds of fantasy coffins that people now can order. This becomes a very popular new tradition. Quay builds these. Something like a hen-shaped coffin would be made for a woman who was the mother of a great many children. And so this chicken would be something that people would parade through the city streets with and eventually bring out to the burial grounds to be buried. So Quay does not have a lot of surviving artwork above ground. And here you see a giant sardine that was made for a fisherman. And you can see how it was fashioned from various parts of wood and then painted in enamel paints and then paraded through the city until it was finally buried underground. He's done a number of these, quite a number of these, and they've taken on, and many museums and collectors around the world have also bought his work because they have found it so fascinating. Here's some examples of Quay's work: an athletic shoe, a motorboat engine, a carpenter's plane, giant yam. And his work has been carried on by his apprentice, who has found ever more fantastic and outrageous coffins to build for their clients, including cameras, jet planes, and even a prostitute on a bed celebrating a woman's job. This is Pa Joe, and he is the second generation fantasy coffin makers in Ghana.